put out my slides or?
Yeah, we can put slides on. Well, we're live. So I'm Howie Hawkins, and this is the Green Socialist Notes podcast. I was a Green Party candidate for president for the Green and the Socialist parties in 2020. And this podcast is about continuing to advocate and educate about the eco-socialist program that we ran on. And our guest today is Denys Bondar, who's a Ukrainian. He teaches physics at Tulane University. He's active now in the Ukraine Solidarity Network in the U.S., one of our co-coordinators. And we've had Denys on a couple times before, and we'll put some articles and biographical information in the chat as we go along. But it's the 30th anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum. So it seemed appropriate for Denys to talk about that and what, the situation in Ukraine in light of that anniversary. So Denys, you want to take it from there?
Yes, thank you, Howie, for having me back. It's great to be back. It's great to interact with your audience again. And of course, we are today celebrating this anniversary, which is has such a deep meaning in Ukrainian society. So I just want to quickly ask: is there a way to show the slides, or I need to upload them? I guess, yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's just go without that. So I wanted to say that the topic for today's conversation is sort of the anniversary of Budapest Memorandum, as well as we can call it a more broader topic of Putin's hybrid nuclear war on Ukraine. And I have an article which should come up very soon. Unfortunately, it didn't make it today, but it will come up very soon in the postle.media, elaborating some of the things that we will discuss today. So we need to understand that nuclear hybrid war, this term which was coined by actually one of the workers at a Ukraine state-owned energy company, is a part of this ongoing Russian invasion, full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's an integral part of it. And because if you recall, on February 24, the full-scale invasion started with the Putin accusing Ukraine of attempting to build a nuclear bomb, and sort of this so-called special military operation was aimed to one of the aim was to denuclearize Ukraine, right? And of course, it's all fake, as many other claims that were put forth by Russian officials and Russian media machine. Actually, RAND Corporation has a nice report about Russian propaganda tactics, and they call it the fire hose of propaganda. Fire hose of falsehoods. It's sort of you flood the media with so many claims that there's no time to kind of to debunk them. Now it's nuclear, of course. Nuclear dimension is a dimension in this conflict, in the sense that luckily and hopefully nuclear weapons will not be used in this war. But still, even though they're not being used, they're still part of this war, right? The nuclear escalation has been a part in the Biden's administration to sort of not to escalate conflict, right? We have heard many reports in the media about their immediate assessment of like Biden administration give a 50% probability that nuclear weapons will be used, tactical nuclear weapons will be used by Russians during the operation of liberation of Kherson, when Ukraine was liberating Kherson, the city of Kherson. So we see that, and of course the military supply to Ukraine, military aid to Ukraine from the West was conditioned upon these fears of nuclear escalation. So yes, nuclear weapons haven't been used, and let's hope that they will not be used, but still they played an important role in this conflict. So on December, but to understand the logic of sort of Russian regime, Putin's regime in this nuclear cyber rattling, we need to go back to the history. And I would like to start with going to December 5, 1994. It's the moment when the Budapest Memorandum is signed. So it's over 30 years ago. where at that time Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and it has decided to surrender it in exchange for the security, I quote, security assurances from Russia, the United States, and United Kingdom. Later, a similar document was signed by other permanent members of Security Council, i.e. nuclear powers, right, which includes China. Similar assurances were given. So there is I would like to kind of advertise for there's an excellent book on this subject, which is there's an excellent book on this subject that was published recently called Inheriting the Bomb, which details the history of denuclearization of Ukraine. Actually, it's written by Mariana Budarin. She's from Harvard University. And why did Ukraine decide to give up such an enormous arsenal? Yeah. The reasons, there were multiple reasons. The first reason, I mean, there are multiple reasons, but like I'm just listing them, is of course the horrible tragedy of Chernobyl. It was in 1986, the fourth reactor of Chernobyl nuclear power plant was destroyed, was exploded, and it is still the largest nuclear accident in the history. This created, even though it was still the Soviet Union, late Soviet Union, perestroika, it was the Gorbachev era, it created actually anti-nuclear movement in Ukraine, ecological movements in Ukraine as well. And the desire to not to have anything to do with nuclear weapons was actually so, on a societal level, was so serious that such demand was so strong that before Ukraine declared independence in '92, there was another declaration made by at that time Ukraine Soviet Parliament called the Declaration of Sovereignty, or Restoration of Sovereignty of Ukraine. In that declaration, there was a promise made that Ukraine will become a non-nuclear state and will not join any military organizations, alliances. So the experience of Chernobyl cannot be underestimated for the causes of independence of Ukraine as well as denuclearization of Ukraine. Another reason was, of course, that Ukraine, after the independence, there was a severe economic collapse, shock therapy, and if you have nuclear weapons, they're actually very expensive to have. They require maintenance, they cost money, and they need. And there was just no money. Ukrainian state had no money. Young Ukrainian independent state had no money, and it needed, in fact, assistance, economic and humanitarian economic assistance from the West. So the economic considerations were also played a role. But I guess one of the most important reasons are actually pressure exerted by the United States and by Russia. Russia was actually kind of secondary, but as we know, the Bush senior administration was very concerned about the collapse of the Soviet Union because of proliferation of nuclear weapons, and it was a main concern. And sort of the almost recognition of independence of Ukraine was conditioned upon its denuclearization. So that's how all these factors came to be, and we have the Budapest Memorandum, which was, as I said, signed 30 years ago. Now, moving forward to 2014, where Russia opens an open war on Ukraine by annexing Crimea. And this is the first time the Budapest Memorandum is being used the Ukraine as a state, as a signatory to the memorandum, subject to the memorandum, calls upon other signatories to convene a meeting to discuss the situation. So since 2014 till today, there were five attempts to convene a formal meeting to discuss security assurances within this memorandum. Of course, Russia, rejected these meetings 5 times. So In fact, the last time this formal request to convene a meeting was given by Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, on the eve of full-scale invasion, when he was given a Munich security speech, just on an even invasion. Of course, we know now that the Russian army heading towards Kyiv was the answer. Russia did not respond to this request. It's interesting enough that in the West, it's very few people know. Only activists know about this document. This even despite the name that this Budapest Memorandum, it's still a UN registered treaty. So you can actually find its text on the UN webpage. So it's an international treaty, and even when I, for example, speak to some, has spoken to some congressional aides of Congress, people who support Ukraine, they all told me, yeah, it's a good question. Why is nobody knows about Budapest Memorandum? There's a kind of amnesia about it. However, we have to understand that this is a big, as far as the security of the United States is concerned, it was a major step forwards because, as we know now from declassified war plans of the United States military, that this was a formidable arsenal, and there were many targets there to be taken down in the case of nuclear war. So, of course, in Ukraine, Budapest Memorandum is a synonym with betrayal. It's basically betrayal. It's a curse word, unfortunately, right? And there is this kind of on a societal level, there's a development of feeling of betrayal, nuclear betrayal, and there's always in public space now and then there is some declarations of some public figures that we should just go back and to build a nuclear weapon. Nobody nobody took this document seriously enough. And the most recent comment was by Zelensky himself made that which kind of you can title it NATO or nukes alternative. Like we either become a member of NATO, Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, or Ukraine will be forced to get nuclear weapons. Later, immediately after that, Zelensky, of course, retracted these comments, but nevertheless, they conveyed the sense of the public the public sentiment, right? This betrayal of the promise of security. Now, it's very important to say that Stephen Pfeiffer, he was actually former ambassador to Moscow, and he was one of the U.S. negotiator of this Budapest Memorandum. Just after the full-scale invasion, he gave an interview where he explicitly said that, I quote, non-proliferation efforts may turn out to be another important casualty of the war, right? So, it's we right now we are in a very difficult situation, Howie, because pretty much we have two nuclear superpowers in the world: the United States and Russia, right? 99% of the nuclear weapons belong to these to these two countries. And there is, at this moment, there's only one standing treaty between them, actually called New START Treaty. All the agreements which come from a era of perestroika, from the Reagan era, are gone, and this treaty is set to expire in February 2026. So almost from a year from now, and given the political climate, it's quite likely that this treaty will lapse. So we are back to the time where there is no constraints on ballistic technology, on nuclear arsenals. So it's quite likely that we will see nuclear arms race. Actually, a number of nuclear weapons for the first time, basically for the first time since 25 years, number of nuclear weapons in the world is again increasing. And it's mainly due to the fact that China is currently rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal. And needless to mention that all other nuclear powers, including the United States, are actually modernizing the arsenals. So our generation will have to will have to face the challenge of of world shadowed by the specter of nuclear weapons. Luckily, we have a rich history of preceding generations to sort of draw on mobilization. So I would like to add this one more important question, which is always being which is on everybody's mind, is Putin will Putin use nukes in Ukraine? The answer, actually, surprisingly, if you go to the literature, specialized literature, and review discussions, which is of course very active, is that nobody knows. Even Putin himself doesn't know. It's such a interesting situation to be on. So, for example, Professor Phillips O'Brien, that he pointed out explicitly that according to all the academic models of nuclear war, as well as war games conducted, Russia should have already used nuclear weapons against Ukraine, yet they haven't used. Right. So this tells you that we are in this enchanted territory where our nuclear thinking and nuclear practices do not correspond. I mean, it's a good thing that they have not used. All right. I would like to emphasize, and it's of course the role of China and India cannot be underestimated in this domain, right? But nevertheless, it's very important to understand that Phillips O'Brien points out that the fact that the war in Ukraine is actually prolonged, and it's increasing in a way nuclear risk because basically the longer the war goes, the more costly it is for Russia, right? And the more Putin might become actually desperate, right? And this is opposite logic to this boiling the frog strategy that Biden administration took, right? So slowly, not increasing any risk. So it's a very interesting. Other actually explicitly comment that all the thinking that have been developed, nuclear thinking about usage of nuclear weapons since Cold War, are basically irrelevant. The current war in Ukraine has annulled all thinking about how to think about the issues. So again, we are in an uncharted territory, very dangerous territory, actually. Dr. Mariana Bujarin, whom I mentioned before, that she wrote a book, very beautiful book about the history of Budapest Memorandum. She she drew a parallel between the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the World War II, and said that, look, actually, for the same reason, Russia might actually, if Ukraine is losing the war, it might actually be beneficial for Russia to use several nuclear weapons in the same way to intimidate Ukraine and to force the surrender. Because obviously, not obvious, it's not maybe obvious, but despite the difficult situation in the front line for now for Ukraine, Ukrainians still will fight, and even if there will be some further losses of territory, the war will continue. Resistance will continue. Armed resistance will continue because Russians have shown, what occupation means. We know the atrocities in Bucha and other cities, occupied cities, are well known and documented, and this will be spread over all other occupied territories. So obviously, the resistance will be continued at any cost, and so using nuclear weapons by Russia. Sort of to intimidate, to force the surrender of Ukraine, even if Ukraine is, losing conventionally, is an option, according to Mariana Bujarin. So this is to understand. I would like to, from my point of view, would like to add that that likelihood of using tactical means non-strategic nuclear weapons in this war is definitely non-zero. And if you judge by the past behavior of Putin, you can see that Putin likes to be kind of a legalist. He's very legalist. He has a legalistic approach. So before invading Georgia in 2008, he suspended participation of Russia in the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. It was a major treaty signed at the end of the Cold War between Warsaw Pact and NATO Pact to demilitarize conventionally in Europe. So again, just on the eve of invasion, Putin suspended this participation in this treaty in 2008. Then, of course, as you remember, recognition of so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic, followed by the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, right? So Putin likes to have this legalistic pretense to do his imperialistic adventures. And so more recently, if you move to more recently, Russia has changed nuclear doctrine, amended its nuclear doctrine, but it's also de-ratified the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty last year. So the fact that there is this, there's a laxing of sort of nuclear legalistic framework tells you that the probability of Putin using nuclear weapons in Ukraine is definitely non-zero. Needless to mention that, I would like to say that even in the times of peace, the fact that nuclear weapons exist is already a safety concern, even if there's no war, right? Because of the accidents that could take place. So, of course, nuclear weapons are inherently dangerous, even in the most peaceful times. Yet, of course, these risks go much more higher in the time of war, like we have right now. Maybe I would like to just emphasize that this is nuclear weapons is one dimension of this Putin's nuclear hybrid war on Ukraine, but the second dimension is what's happening in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and what took place in the Chernobyl power plant in 2022 during the first assault of Russian troops on Kyiv.
Okay, well, I just want to point out, you mentioned your article's coming out in Posle.media. Posle spelled Posle.media. It's a publication of left-wing anti-war Russians who have gone into exile because of the situation in Russia. So that's a publication worth following. One of the things we're hearing a lot about now from those who oppose solidarity with Ukraine is that we are provoking a nuclear war because we let Ukraine launch ATACMS missiles at military targets on Russian territory. And since Ukraine first did that on November 19th, as of yesterday, they sent 26 of those missiles into Russia. In the same period, Russia has sent thousands of drones, ballistic missiles, and glide bombs into Ukraine. So it seems kind of stretching it to say that the escalation is coming from the Ukrainian side. Yet that is a constant refrain right now. And there are a lot of people in this country who say, well, I don't care about the Ukrainians. I don't want to get nuked in a nuclear war. So it's a way Putin seems to have used nuclear weapons the same way Daniel Ellsberg used to say the U.S. did. And that is, you don't have to blow them up. You just have to threaten. It's like a mugger putting a gun to your head and saying, give me your wallet. And they don't have to fire the pistol to get your wallet. So where do you think that's at now? I mean, that is seems to be the real main theme coming from the Kremlin these days. And it seems, as you mentioned, to have intimidated the Biden administration into slow walking arms to Ukraine, throughout this war. Where do you think that stands, particularly in light of, the fact that you're pointing out that, Putin could use nuclear weapons?
Yes. So yes, ATACMS is, of course, first of all, I would like to clarify some terminology. So in media, you would hear ATACMS being classified as a long-range missiles, but it's actually false. According to the professional literature, if missile flies on the distance below 500 kilometers, and the furthest the ATACMS can go is 300, so it's way below this threshold. It's all called short-range ballistic missiles. If it flies from 500 to 5,500, it's all called medium-range ballistic missiles. And if you're flying above 5,500 kilometers, it's called long-range ballistic missile or intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? So there is this big, misunderstanding of terminology. So I would like to emphasize that this Putin's blackmail did work, right? It did work, as you just said, that the Biden administration clearly took these threats or signaling, or as it's called in professional circles, seriously. And we'll have to see. And in fact, I would even argue that the current perilous situation on the front line is basically directly responsible for this nuclear threats. Had Ukraine been supplied enough weapons in 2022, right at the end, when there was the Kherson liberation happening and the Kharkiv region liberation happening, the war would be over. Like, the war literally would have been already over, because that was the weakest point of Russian military, and we could have liberated territory if what was taken before 2000, before the full-scale invasion. Yet, even during the very right now infamous Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023, right, I would like to remind you that the weapons were supplied after the counteroffensive was finished. Actually, some types of weapons, and again, this is all can be traced, I think, to this nuclear cyberwarfare. So it does work. It did work, I honestly, I don't. We still have a taboo, right, on international affairs about testing nuclear weapons, let alone even they're using them, right? Now, if you are actually, if you want to talk about serious, but seriously beyond the headlines, there was a very interesting, very thorough study conducted in 2020. About Russian escalation management. So how Russians think about escalation management and usage of the nuclear war weapons, and the actual usage of tactical nuclear weapons, according to the study, could happen if you have a regional war. So, like for example, a small-scale NATO-Russia contingency, right? And and even in that case, the usage of nuclear weapons is restricted to either a demonstrative use, means blowing up somewhere in the middle of nowhere, so it causes no immediate casualties, just to threaten, to demonstrate, so that we mean business, or or some very limited battlefield uses, actually. So to be, Howie, given the fact that right now the front line is extremely long, right? So like over 1,000 miles long, and the density of the troops, actually usage of nuclear weapons in the front makes no sense. It's not worth, the political consequences of this usage for Russia would be way bigger than military usage. So the only meaningful thing for them to use as a blackmail either to blow up a civilian city, right, to destroy a civilian city, in order to force Ukraine to surrender, or that's it. That's the only option, actually, right? That's literally the only option that they can exercise. But again, the political cost from China and India is absolute. Would be precautions would be huge, because one have to remember that in 2022. As again, Stephen Pfeiffer said that nuclear non-proliferation efforts might be one of the victims of this war. South Korea, right, expressed a strong interest in making nuclear weapons, right, in building its own nuclear arsenal, and so the China is not interested in showing that nuclear weapons are effective, right? That this is something that can be used, because China has literally territorial disputes with all of its neighbor, except perhaps Russia, and and India is nuclear country, right? It's again political. I mean, the political weapons is a weapon of. It's more political weapon than actual, like a weapon of that can make a difference in the battlefield. So I still think the probability is very small of usage of these weapons, but it's definitely non-zero. And whoever tells you that it's zero is ingenious. It's not genuine, right? The person is not genuine or a fool. And of course, but if somebody tells you its probability is extremely high, that's also not true, because we don't have any, despite all these policy changes, Russia's policy changes in nuclear realm, we still do not have any concrete evidence that the nuclear weapons are being taken from storage, et cetera, being transported somewhere. Because if this happen, the intelligence community of the United States will be, screaming through the lungs. We would have these reports immediately, because, as you know, there are many satellites, there's many intelligence assets to actually monitor precisely this activity, right? When nuclear weapons is being taken from storage and moved, because we're talking about tactical nuclear weapons, which are small, so they are currently stored in the secure facilities.
The thing about the Budapest Memorandum that I've seen, one of the things I think is relevant today is it relates to the discussions around negotiations. There's a lot of, speculation on what Trump is going to do, and Russia and Ukraine actually negotiating. And when I look back over the history of negotiations, going back to 2022, the sticking point for Ukraine was they wanted security guarantees from the West. And for Russia, that was unacceptable. And so, there's a lot of stuff saying Boris Johnson told them to just go fight. But the thing Boris Johnson would not say is that the West would guarantee Ukraine's security if they signed that peace agreement. And that's what held back Ukraine, because given their experience with the Budapest Memorandum and other treaties with Russia, Ukraine doesn't trust Russia to live up to its end. So it seems the security guarantees seem to be central to getting a peace deal done. I wonder what you think about that.
Yes, it's absolutely critical. This is one of the most important factors that is demanded not by Zelensky, but the whole Ukrainian society, right? Nobody wants some kind of ceasefire and repeat a few years later of the same horror, right? Everybody wants, a kind of ceasefire that can meaningfully last at least, right? And, hopefully, for this war to go into more of a diplomatic domain. Again, this is what Zelensky says, but it's not that Zelensky says this because this is what Zelensky wants. This is what's really demanded by the Ukrainian society at large. And I had actually opportunity to actually speak in person with David Arachamia. He is the leader of Zelensky party in Ukrainian parliament, and he was also one of the negotiators in Istanbul, where these negotiations were happening at the beginning in 2022. And he actually told me that this situation exactly commented that the idea was that the problem with that, as you correctly said, that the Western leaders would not sign any guarantees, and on the other hand, and the second hand, Russia is actually forcing you to have a cap on Ukrainian military, right? If we believe those leaked documents, drafts that were produced during the negotiations in Istanbul, we will see there was actually limits negotiated on a number of Ukrainian troops, like 150,000. So it's it's a tricky issue, right? Not only no guarantees, but also like limits on Ukrainian military. So, try figure, right, in such an arrangement, because as Zarhamia told me that their vision was to stop the war, but stop in such a way that it does not recur later, right? Because again, Ukrainians have experience with the same thing happened in 2024, right? There were two Minsk accords signed, and they were basically not observed. They were ultimately violated in 2022, right?
Yeah, Arkamia had an interview that was distorted by people that don't support Ukraine to say he said Johnson told him to just fight. And the part left out is that the security guarantees is what Ukraine wanted, and Johnson wouldn't provide them. So, you know, his words have been, I think, misused in that interview, and it's, I think, important for people to note that you talked directly with him, and you know, he said it was the security guarantees that is the key issue for the Ukrainians. So, why don't we go to questions that people have put in the chat? And see if Jenny, who's doing the background work, can put it up, or I can go to the.
I don't see them, so it would be nice to, yeah.
Here we go. Denys, what do you think, and this is from Scout Trooper 164, what do you think the outcome will be for Ukraine in the Russo-Ukrainian war? I feel it may not be perfect, but with the loss of Syria and their waning economy, it may be worse for Russia.
So, I mean, frankly speaking, I mean, this is still active war, right? We don't know what will happen. It's, you know, I hope that it will get sort of maybe some Korean scenario would be actually, that's actually what's right now majority of Ukrainians want. You know, to the hostility should stop and you know, move to sort of a diplomatic realm. That's. But you know, it's still active war. It's hard. You know, if I would make any predictions, it would be this. I would be disrespectful to your listeners, Howie. You know, to be honest, it's a war, and we've seen how this war turned one way, the other way. Anything can happen. But the only thing I can say for sure that the Ukrainian resistance, armed resistance, will continue, no matter what. Even if, you know, if Ukrainian government is somehow decided to, you know, to surrender, it will continue. Because it's not driven by Zelensky, it's driven by the people from below. Zelensky just happened to be the face of this resistance.
Yeah, I would just underscore that. I was at a meeting with members of Sotsiony Ruch, which is the democratic socialist organization called the Social Movement, in Kryvyi Rih, and I met with miners, members of the Veterans Union, Teachers Union, young people. And particularly the veterans emphasized that they said there are 5 million Ukrainians in arms. And if our commanders and the oligarchs continue to screw things up, we'll take matters into our own hand. And there's no way they're going to surrender to the Russians. I mean, that was powerful, you know. And I said, take power into your own hands. You mean like the Portuguese army did to get out of the colonies in Africa and get rid of their fascist dictatorship? And they said, yeah, maybe, but we're thinking of Nestor Makhno, who is the leader of the Ukrainian insurgent army, an anarchist peasant-based movement that fought both the White Army that wanted to bring back the land-owning class and the Red Army, which wanted to bring Ukraine back under Russian tutelage and really didn't want the land to go to the peasants, but to collect the state farms, which is not what the peasants wanted. So they were invoking the revolutionary tradition in Russia. It was one of my most striking things that happened when I was in Ukraine talking to people. So, yeah, Ukrainians don't want Russian domination, and they're not going to settle for it. So, Scout Trooper 164, do you have any history of the Russians bullying Ukrainians over the centuries? I feel if we are to challenge the mindset of Ukraine only existing since 91, that more history should be explored.
Yeah, the very good question. I would like to, for the Scout Trooper 164, recommend this Harvard historian. His name is Serhiy Plokhy, who wrote a very nice, he's from Harvard University. He wrote a series of books about sort of Ukrainian-Russian relationships, let's put it this way, and historical reasons for this war. I would really recommend for a nice overview of this. But brief story, yes, of course, there has been. I will, if one is honest, the word Russia is itself stolen from Ukraine. Kiev was founded in 8th century, the capital of Ukraine, whereas Moscow is at 11th century. So. The Moscow emerged as a kind of under the protectorate of Golden Horde, the Khan, right? And then it evolved. So and Rus, original Rus name, used to refer to the land, roughly speaking, central, the area of Kiev and Kiev and Rus, we call it, right, in Ukrainian kind of historical tradition, is this, except south of Ukraine, sort of like the modern territory of Ukraine and Belarus. So the name Rus was actually taken by Muscovites, right? It's a Russian Empire, Peter the Great, who changed the name to the Russian Empire. So since the foundation of Russian Empire by Peter, actually, it was the many changes took place. For example, literacy in Kiev, right, actually fell down, and there were a number of very infamous, especially in 19th century, there were a number of attempts to outlaw Ukrainian language, actually, in Ukraine. So when everybody, when we talk about, for example, the golden age of Russian literature of 19th century, we are at the same time Ukrainian language was literally banned. So there was high culture could not develop at the same scale. It was only restricted to people who were doing clandestinely. So the relationships, the Russian bullying Ukrainians has a very long story. I mean, it's kind of too long to say to describe it. But as again, I would refer to the books of Serhiy Plokhy, who actually who wrote a nice summary of this history. And it's very important to realize that also Ukraine, if you even go back to the 20th century and talk about the October Revolution, one of the important players in those revolutionary movements was, of course, Leon Trotsky. He himself is from Ukraine originally, from South Ukraine, from Odessa, near Odessa, and he actually spoke Ukrainian. He understood that there is a difference between Ukrainians and Russians. He understood this question of identity very well, and Lenin himself understood this. He has very infamous essay about on a great Russian chauvinism, right, talking about suppression of minorities. And the Ukrainian question was a very important question in actually a revolutionary movement. And one has to also recall that Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus were three kind of founding republics of the Soviet Union. And in 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, it was not decision of the entire union. It was decision of the leaders of three republics: Russian Socialist Republic, Ukrainian Socialist, and Belarusian. So Ukraine did exist not only culturally but politically before 91, and even the Ukrainians. It's also this fact that Ukraine kind of politically even existed during the Soviet time. Ukrainian Socialist Republic had the elites of Ukrainian Socialist Republic had a famous kind of struggle with Moscow for their autonomy, because of course on paper Soviet Union is supposed to be federal state. On paper there were lots of kind of freedoms given to the republics, but in practice it was not the case. Yet the leaders of Ukrainian Republic were actually trying to sort of go by the book, shall we say, to maintain their autonomy as much as possible. This actually, for example, did not happen in Belarus. Actually, this did not happen to the same degree in Belarus. This is why, for example, Belarusian language is in much more significantly has been significantly decimated and depressed, right, and destroyed. Whereas this is why Ukrainian language was able to preserve throughout the times, and of course, so this is. Sorry, this is. I wanted to be short, but let me stop here.
Well, I would add one thing. You mentioned it briefly, the Ukrainian Republic from 1917 to 1921. In the middle of the revolution, Ukrainians declared independence. And I mentioned Nestor Makhno's anarchist communist army. They were fighting for independence. They didn't want to be recolonized by Moscow. And a similar movement with a similar program was the left socialist revolutionaries. And they had what they called green armies that were fighting both the White Army and the Red Army. So, that just shows that as how wrong Putin is when he says Ukraine is Lenin's fault. He invented it. So what's the next question? Denys, and this is again from Scout Trooper 164. Why do you act like the Russian-Ukrainian war? Why do people act like the Russian-Ukrainian war when people can trace the conflict between the two countries since 2003 over Tuzla Island and trying to integrate them into a single economic state?
I mean, it's a good question, but by the logic of the same question, one has to recall even policy of Boris Yeltsin, the predecessor of Putin, where it was around 95, I think, after Budapest Memorandum, basically they were saying, so that Crimea question we should probably reconsider, etc., etc. So there were already problems even earlier than that. So yeah, Ukraine-Russian relationship even under Yeltsin were actually quite strained now and then actually. So there were territorial claims done on Crimea as well during Yeltsin. So in a way, Putin, if you think about it's somehow in the Western culture, how we have this. I mean, of course, Putin is terrible, right? I mean, it's basically fascist dictator, but it doesn't mean Yeltsin was like an absolute great, like a nice guy, of course, Yeltsin's authoritative tendencies are, minuscule as compared to Putin's, so we forgive everything for Zelensky, for Yeltsin's, but there were already problems in Yeltsin's time as well. So in a way, Putin, in some respect, Putin continues this policy actually, and unfortunately. And of course, you have to remember that the Chechen War, the first Chechen War, was actually executed under Boris Yeltsin as well. So Russian Federation's imperialistic tendencies basically, were never ceased after the collapse of Soviet Union.
Scout Trooper 164 again. This is a bonus question. What do you appreciate about your country the most, Denys?
Wow, that's a very nice question. Thank you for asking. So I think I would, I would say resilience. Resilience got its resilience throughout the ages. That's to your earlier question about the history. To maintain the culture, to maintain the language, despite all these oppressions that took place, not only because of Russia, but other, like Poland actually played an important role throughout the ages, to resilience. And also, for example, this resilience through innovations in this current war, right? How many innovative solutions, because of lack of actually military supplies, Ukrainian people had to undergo in order to come up with these drones, and how drone revolution kind of in warfare took place in Ukraine, and it's still taking place, by the way, still taking place. So that actually is this innovation, resilience, and the innovativeness is really much I appreciate, and also which I personally had experience with while I live in Ukraine. This. Actually instincting yearning for freedom, actually. Because as we know very well, the Russian war from 2014 is a response to the fact, it's a consequence of the fact that Russia could not take control of Ukraine through political means, right? Through proxies like Yanukovych, etc., etc. And all these two Maidans were basically, as a first and foremost, were for basic desire of freedom, like free to organize, free to make their own decision, like as a country and as a society to make own decisions. So I think these three things I appreciate the most. Thank you for this question.
Andrew Hager, less importantly, Denys, are you aware of the evolution of black frogs within the Chernobyl region and the train graveyard as well? Forgive me, it's a touchy subject, but I'm quite curious.
I'm not familiar with any black frogs, to be honest. I mean, there's of course there's graveyards of equipment that being used during the cleanup, or Chernobyl cleanup. It's located in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Yes, it's famous, and if whoever is taking a tour in Chernobyl zone should think about it. I mean, I think it's part of the tour. It's quite a kind of it's one of the contaminated parts. But yeah, so answer is that I'm not aware of those facts.
Sam Friedman, Denys and Howie, how can people help Ukrainian people survive the cold of the winter? Well, I'll let Denys answer that because he's very involved in this campaign. If Jenny can put in the chat the link to a campaign the Ukraine Solidarity Network is doing to provide generators for people in Ukraine. But Denys, you're right at the center of that. Why don't you describe it more?
Yeah, so we means the Ukraine Solidarity Network have a GoFundMe page open currently to collect donations for buying generators, gas power generators, which would be supplied to some members of the rail workers and minor trade unions, which have three or more children or have disabled relatives. As you know, winter in Ukraine is kind of cold, can get cold, and and outages, which happen very right now regularly after every missile attack. There is outages like 6 hours, outage happen. It's a regular occurrence. In these generators would be is a lifeline for those families. And unfortunately these families are not able to get them by themselves. So please consider making a donation to the link that has been just posted in the chat.
Andrew Hager, Denys and Howie, pardon me for asking if it's a touchy subject, but would it be too risky to try and salvage any locomotives and rolling stock, among other tech from the Chernobyl train graveyard? Andrew is a train buff, so that's.
I mean, it's a. I don't know, right? But I don't think it's a good idea. Just come on, Chernobyl. All these things happened in 1986, right? So today we're celebrating 30th anniversary of Budapest Memorandum. So this happened even before that, like it's 40 years ago. So those wrecks are right now just should stay where they are, even if they were like nuclear free, right? It's just junk right now. As you know, right? Any equipment, heavy equipment, right? I mean, a car needs maintenance, right? To be running, right? Try to see what happens if you park the car for 30 years. What happens to the car?
Well, I would say to Andrew, because I know he likes trains, he should go to Ukraine. They have a great train system. They've kept it running despite the war. The Railway Workers Union, at the cost of some workers' lives, have kept it running. Both the intercity railroads, which I took, and also the mass transit in Kyiv is. It puts America to shame in terms of public transportation. So if you miss it in the U.S., you can go to Ukraine and experience it. It's quite a good system. So Denys, Scout Trooper 164. Denys, I apologize for my anti-Russian stance. So this will be the last thing I ask. But what would you say, what would you like to say to those in the back who believe the Russo-Ukrainian war is a proxy war?
I mean, yes, and it's. I mean, it's just there are so many. There were so many questions given to this. Answer to this question. So let me just try once again. Even how this. It's also understand which war, right? Because the armed conflicts started in 2014 for most Ukrainians, right? And if you talk about 22 specifically, the full scale phase, right? Let's talk about it. So there's this famous quote that Zelensky said on, that I need ammunition, not a right. It's imagine. Let's compare Ukraine to Afghanistan, right? When the U.S. was withdrawing troops it started, of course, under Trump, but completed under Biden, and it was sort of went to this disaster. The Afghan army collapsed, despite all the predictions that they will be able to sustain some resistance for at least a year or two. The then president of Afghanistan, what did he do? He just disappeared with the suits full of cash. He just ran away. Like he was the first to run away with the U.S. troops, right? So, and he obviously can say that he did this because he knew, that he doesn't have as much so popular support as maybe anticipated. So likewise, what Zelensky did, right? I mean, remember, Howie, like people don't realize, but the Russians' troops were at the kind of the peak of the attempt to take the Kyiv. The Russian troops were only 10 kilometers, so it's like less than 8 miles, right? About 8 miles away from his office. 8 miles, and he did not leave. Right? So that's when Ukraine was in the deepest kind of episode of the war. So he decided not to leave. And why did he decide not to leave? Not because he's has no brains, right? And he just understood that people will fight, right? It's not about, despite all these advices from the Western governments, including the US, right, to actually relocate to the west of Ukraine, he stayed because he knew that people will fight. People did fight, and people protected. So just the beginning of the war tells you a lot about that. This was not a proxy war, right? This was not a proxy war, and it's still not a proxy war.
Yeah, that's a common narrative we get, that it makes the Ukrainian people invisible when you analyze it as a proxy war. The Ukrainians are acting in their own self-defense, and they get help from wherever they can get it. That doesn't make them proxies. It means they're getting help from where they can get it. So I'm really tired of that trope, but it's still out there. So that gets through all the questions. Denys, is there anything else you would like? We didn't get to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Yeah, I was expecting
to say a few words about that situation.
Yeah, so I would say that this. So first of all, I would like to remind you that as a part of Putin's nuclear hybrid warfare, was actually is to utilize this blackmail through, nuclear power. So you remember that in 2022, the Chernobyl site was occupied. And by the way, there is Serhiy Plokhy, the Harvard historian, actually recently published a very excellent book on occupation of Chernobyl, based on the interviews. And you can clearly see that it was used as a blackmail, right? As a nuclear blackmail. Of course, it's not nuclear weapons, but it's nuclear nevertheless. And the situation in Zaporizhzhia, despite the fact that it disappeared from the media, it still remains very difficult. And I know, Howie, that you have interviewed the member of trade unions, and they told you, they confirm our suspicion that the situation is still difficult. So I will just outline that from the beginning of occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, there was immediate workers' life put at risk, because the Russian services, secret services, basically were conducting cleansing operations. They were suppressing, they were threatening, they were torturing, psychological torture, physical torture. Up at presently, we know that there are 10 Ukrainian nuclear engineers that disappeared. Their whereabouts are unknown. And whereas the majority of not all, but the majority of nuclear staff were able to evacuate, about 80%. The remaining staff is basically kept as a hostage. Is literally as hostage, and they're bound by partially by duty of protecting the site. And unfortunately, as the war continues, we know that that in order for a nuclear power plant to be safe, you need to have three things. The first thing is that you have to have a constant supply of electricity so that the cooling system works, because even if nuclear power plant is in a shutdown mode, you still need to cool it. For example, Chernobyl site, despite the fact that the tragedy happened over 40 years ago, it still needs to be actually cooled. Almost 40 years ago, right? It still needs to be cooled. Some of these pools with radioactive fluid waste. So we hear constant reports of the electricity lines being damaged, so that the Zaporizhzhia site needs to switch to its autonomous diesel generators, and these diesel generators, of course, can fail. Right? They are meant as a temporary measure. Luckily, nothing bad happened. But again, the failure to cool the fuel and the sort of nuclear waste can lead to the meltdown, and we know this is what happens in Fukushima. Good thing is that the Zaporizhzhia, I guess, silver lining to this is that Zaporizhzhia site has been in a shutdown for already almost 3 years, and that's a good thing, because it means that should a cooling system fail, the meltdown will not happen quick. It will take some time to develop, so there's more time to react. So that's a good news. But again, it's still the same dangerous news. Also, as pointed out by the Union of Concerned Scientists, that it's the nuclear fuel is still in the reactors of the new Zaporizhzhia plant, and it's past the kind of the normal safety procedures for how long the nuclear fuel can be in the reactor, even though the reactor is not functioning right now. So we are in this uncharted territory, right? Whether in the middle of war zone, the reactor is not being operated. Many procedures are being violated, safety. So this is a difficult situation. Of course, since the destruction of the Kakhovka dam, we have another problem: is that from the Kakhovka water reservoir, right? The Zaporizhzhia site was taking water to cool down reactors. Again, now, according to the reports of Ukrainian Ministry of Energy, we see that the water levels at the Zaporizhzhia plant site remain stable. Now it remains stable. What's going to happen long term, we don't know, because, as we know, the reservoir is shrunk. So this is another concern as a result of the war. And the third factor is that the staff is extremely stressed out. Like they are constantly being harassed and blackmailed. Those remaining people on the site, engineers, and it's an unsafe condition. Russians are using it as a military base. There is a military objectively confirmed recorded facts of military equipment present. And there's some constant provocations happening, which is reported, which is again confirmed objectively. So this is a permanently unsafe situation, despite the fact that it disappeared from the media, is actually is still a big danger. And I would like to request for you, Howie, to put in the chat a petition that we have started with you back in 2022. And unfortunately, that petition is still actual. It's still, it's important. It's as important then as now. Is to create a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, so that we could, little bit have more safety, more certainty in safety at this facility. So this is the idea is to call on a UN General Assembly to authorize the creation of demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, along the lines as it was done during the Suez Canal crisis, where Britain and Israel invaded Egypt, and UN created demilitarized zone around the Suez Canal. So there is an international precedent which we can follow here. I know the international organizations right now in a horrible situation, as we know they're extremely ineffective. But if you this petition, if we could collect right now, we have almost 26,000 signatures. But of course, I mean it's a very small number if you put it in a context of possible consequences if should anything bad happen in Zaporizhia, right? And if we could, force this issue to the agenda again, that would be great. So this is why we need your, the support of your audience in signing and distributing the petition. And again, this is unfortunately how you and me know this very well, that we have these, let's call them left-wing influencers, right, who have a large media presence, who talk about nuclear war, nuclear issues, Zaporizhia, etc., but they never mention about our petition, right? Our petition is not, it's absolutely, it's not bellicose. It's very, modest request and very sensible. Anyone, with whom we talk would actually understand the reason that this is a good idea. Even if you believe in all these Russian tropes, right, you still want to have safety, right, nuclear safety at Zaporizhia. Yet it's not being, this petition is, again, it's not receiving attention. It probably should receive it. And again, I mean, in general, the situation in Zaporizhia is not receiving attention. It should receive it. I would like to say it's an important, very important dimension to Putin's nuclear hybrid war, because should anything happen in Zaporizhia, right, on purpose, even if it's done on purpose by Russia, it's going to be extremely hard to prove it, right? Unlike if Putin explodes a nuke, actually, if Putin explodes a nuke in Ukraine, the proof will be beyond doubt. It's easy to to detect this, to characterize this, that the nuclear explosion took place. There's already plenty of infrastructure to monitor nuclear tests in the world. So this will be immediately evident for everyone. Putin cannot lie himself out of this situation of using nukes. But Zaporizhia is different. If something goes wrong and there is a substantial radioactivity release, even if it's done on purpose, right, this would be very hard to prove. Like it will be plausible denial kind of scenario, right? It will be much more harder to prove, let alone to prosecute anyone. But also, I would like to mention, since the site is occupied by Russian forces, according to Geneva Convention, they're responsible for actually safety of the site. But their concern for that safety of the site is rather symbolic. And I would like to mention, a very paradoxical situation, that we have an International Atomic Agency as a main nuclear watchdog, on the international level, UN watchdog. Yet it has a mission. It has a mission at the Zaporizhia site, as well as at actually all other Ukrainian nuclear power plants. They have observatory missions there. And if you go and to their webpage and check out who is the deputy, David Gross's deputy, you will be surprised to find out it's Mikhail Chudakov. Is his deputy, who is the former Rosatom manager. And Rosatom is the Russian state-owned nuclear power company. So, and he has been his deputy for many years, and despite the call of many environmental organizations, Greenpeace in particular, that Chudakov, the deputy of Grossi, has to step down because there's a conflict of interest. Russia is occupying site at the same time. It's Russian ex-Russian officials, right, conduct the missions. There is a clear conflict of interest, right? This is absolutely, horrible situation. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to actually keep pressurizing international bodies about the situation of Zaporizhzhia, because despite the fact that it's gone from the media, it's still a big danger. And I would like to again express a big thank you to all the Ukrainian engineers who remain there to maintain this facility, because they're heroes. They're keeping this site safe, and I would say the world at large also safe from another major nuclear accident.
Yeah, you mentioned left-wing influencers. I'm calling them these days post-left interviewers. They are people that made the transition from the left to the right, a lot of times through conspiracy theories, from anti-vax positions to conspiracies that the Kremlin produces. And so they have a left-wing branding and they advocate right-wing positions. So they ignore Zaporizhzhia and focus on, ATACMS strikes into Russia as supposedly starting World War III. The thing the petition talks about, it's based on the idea that the UN General Assembly can bypass the Security Council by a provision called Uniting for Peace, which the UN adopted in 1950, and it was used in the Suez Crisis. So that's the thing that makes that possible. And the other thing I want to mention is I had the opportunity to meet with the leader of the Atomic Workers Union in Kyiv and their international representative. And one of the things they said is that the reports they're getting is that Russia uses the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant site for artillery strikes across the Dnipro River to Nikopol and other places in Kherson. And of course, the Ukrainians can't strike back. So it's a situation where, as you say, if there is an accident there, the Russians will certainly blame it on the Ukrainians, even if they did it on purpose. So that's a crisis that needs more attention, no doubt. And I hope people, if they haven't, sign that petition, which is in the chat. So we've come to our hour. Is there any last words, Denys, you want to share with people?
I want to thank you for interviewing me, still being a very active member of our Ukraine Solidarity Network. First of all, for your audience, for a great question, especially Scott Trooper for being so active, asking so many questions. And the last thing I would like to say is that is to remember that what me and Howie already said that this war is the war for national survival for Ukrainians, and it will continue. It will continue. And Ukrainians, we have to remember, the Ukrainians are first and foremost the one who want peace, because they have been bombed for the last 3 years, for almost nearly 3 years, daily. People who lost children, husbands, right, sons, etc., relatives, friends, in a very large number. And Ukrainians want peace first and foremost, actually. And we have to stand with them. We have to help them because this is the just war. This is really the just war. This is the war against imperial aggression. And we need to also exercise informational hygiene, right? We should not fall for any catchy titles, fall for any catchy slogans. We should, we should rely on sources or reliable sources. We have to remember that, there's no perfect sources, right? But nevertheless, there are, media outlets that have proven to be on the right side, like proven to be consistently correct, right? Making mistakes, that happens, but lying is a different story. We should not believe, at this point, if anybody tries to get any news from any Russian media, this is just unacceptable. Like, I'll just tell you, like this, there's no way you can listen to that news and get anything out of it. There's just, nothing is going to happen, right? So please don't buy into these pro-Kremlin tropes under no condition for your own mental health, I would say, frankly speaking. And as I said, on behalf of all Ukrainian people, I would like to express a great gratitude to the American people for this aid, military as well as humanitarian aid. It really made a huge difference. And despite you can hear, despite sort of maybe Ukrainian politicians say, "Oh, not enough," still Ukrainian people are grateful for the support given to all the countries, especially the United States.
Well, thank you, Denys. I just second what you said about Russian state media. If you read it and then you the next day listen to the post-left influencers, you know where they got their stories from. But a lot of people don't know where they got their stories from. They're taking it from these influencers, which is a real problem. And you called it information hygiene. I think, we really need to take that to heart. So thanks again, Denys. I will be here again next week. I'm not going to have a guest. I need to have a session with people answering questions. Haven't done that in a long time since my trip to Europe last week. I had a Syrian to talk about what was happening there, and now Ukraine. But we'll be back to Ukraine. I just got a request from 2 Ukrainian eco-socialists to come on and talk about the environmental and economic issues that the Ukrainian left is dealing with, as they say, fighting Russian banks and Russian tanks and Western banks. And as the leader of the miners' union said, when I referenced that, he said, and also Ukrainian oligarchs. So we'll have them on in the near future. They're going to give me a date. So anyway, everybody have a happy holiday, and we will be here next Saturday, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern.
Slava Ukraini, as Scott Trooper 164 reminded us, and glory to the heroes.
Slava Ukraini.